Good afternoon and welcome to the OR Today webinar series. We're excited to have over 600 registered attendees for today's webinar. I want to remind you today's webinar is eligible for one continuing education hour, and the post-webinar survey and certificate process, as are now automated, the survey link will be included in the follow-up email, which you'll receive about an hour after this webinar has finished. Once you've completed the survey, you'll be able to download your certificate immediately. This webinar is also eligible for one credit for ESHAM and CBSPD. A separate email containing a link for this credit will be sent out by today's sponsor, Healthmark, during the next few days. Let's kick off today's webinar by giving an OR Today Live surprise pack to the attendee that can tell me the answer to the following trivia question. March is Red Cross Month. Who founded the American Red Cross? Answer now using the questions feature on your dashboard. While you're answering, just a reminder that our 7th annual OR Today Live Surgical Conference will be taking place from August the 16th to the 18th at the Omni Interlochen Hotel in Denver, Colorado. Join us to discover new opportunities, broaden your knowledge and exchange ideas. Registration is now open and more information can be found at ortodaylive.com. Also, this year, the World Health Organization is celebrating the Year of the Nurse. Help us celebrate by sharing a standout story about you or a nurse in your life. Each submission will be entered to win a $25 Bath & Body Works gift card, and more details can be found at ortoday.com/contest. Okay, and let's see who the winner of our OR Today surprise package is. And it is Kim Thompson. Congratulations, Kim. Of course, the correct answer is Clara Barton. OR Today would like to thank our sponsor, Healthmark Industries. Since 1969, Healthmark Industries has developed and marketed innovative solutions to aid healthcare facilities in their delivery of surgical instruments and other life-saving medical devices to patients. Healthmark Industries' mission is to continue to innovate, continue support, and to continue to serve the healthcare provider industry and support services that make it possible to deliver quality healthcare. Visit hmark.com for more information. Okay, our presenter today is Kevin Anderson, Clinical Education Coordinator for Healthmark Industries. Kevin, you may begin whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you, Linda, and thank you for your introduction. And today, I just want to welcome everybody and thank you all for joining me for this webinar this afternoon. It's called The Importance of Proper Point of Use Treatment and Transportation. OR and SPD working together for the best patient outcomes. And for me, this is a very foundational topic, and I love talking about it. And I'm really excited that we have so many people listening. I think by the end of this presentation, my hope is that you guys will have some takeaways, some key takeaways to help you drive quality for proper point of use treatment and transportation of reusable medical devices. Linda did already introduce me, but this is some information about me. I am an RN. I am a clinical education coordinator with Healthmark, and my email is on there for you in case you have any questions or comments or stories you'd like to share with me. Again, I will put it out there at the end of the presentation as well, so you don't have to scurry to try and write it down now if you don't have the time. Just a quick disclosure, the education team here at Healthmark, we're employees of this company. As Linda already mentioned, we're a manufacturer and distributor of medical products, but we don't receive compensation for this presentation, and all opinions are those of the presenter. We always want to drive home that, hey, we're trying to present some great content for you, but you always, when it comes to reusable medical devices, you gotta check out their instructions for use. You can't rely on these presentations for training as a training guide, or for us as a promotion for our company. Again, Linda already went over our policy and philosophy, but I do want to reiterate that Healthmark is committed to education. That's part of the reason why we love doing these webinars and doing seminars on site and all those things. And we like to be there for our customer and educate them, because an educated customer is our best customer. So real quick, I want to go over the objectives for this webinar today. we want to discuss the importance and impact of point of use care regarding surgical instruments and endoscopes. We're going to talk about Joint Commission scoring revisions relative to sterilization and high-level disinfection. And we're going to talk about identifying current accreditation standards that pertain to point of use care of those instruments. And remember, I didn't put it on the slide, but remember, I want to give you that take home, those points that you can take back to your department and drive some quality as it relates to point of use care, because this topic, I believe, is foundational for the success of your SPD and also for safety of your patients. We've all seen, unfortunately, SPDs being highlighted in the news. For us in the Detroit area, we're very familiar with DMC, but this stuff is happening all over the country where SPDs are struggling and they're being written in the papers about sending dirty instruments to the OR. And if we're all honest with ourselves, we probably understand that this could happen anywhere, okay? It's not just DMC's problem. It's not just those that show up in the newspapers. So my biggest hope is that you guys will have something to take home at the end of this presentation. But we also have questions for you. This is a polling question. We'd like to know, where do you work? Are you operating room? Are you sterile processing? Are you endoscopy? Are you infection prevention? Or you might fall under another category like administration. But we'd like to know a little bit more about you. So if you could, please answer the poll option that we have on your screen. So point of use care, as you all know, is a hot topic. In AORN, at a forum in New Orleans in 2018, they discussed this topic at length about the importance of point of use care of instruments, and they discussed the challenges and the objections. We're all familiar with the not enough time, or it's not my job, or maybe even there's no water on the sterile field, okay? I wanna talk about each one of these, all right? Not enough time is one that unfortunately I've been guilty of. I'm a former OR nurse, all right? We are pressured every day to turn over our rooms and get quicker and more efficient, not only at the procedure itself, but at the turnarounds in between. So it's really easiest to be very tunnel visioned and focused on the task at hand and not worry so much about the care and handling of the instruments. Another one that unfortunately I'm still guilty of is the not my job one. As you know, I'm an RN and I was an OR nurse. So I was not trained as a surgical technologist. I was not trained to know the importance and the standards and all the instructions that support point of use care of instruments. So I just kind of defaulted my practice to what the culture of the facility was at that time. Unfortunately, the not my job was the culture of our facility at the time, and I had no problem going with that. So just in full disclosure, I know there's plenty of you out there that can relate to that, and it's easy to do because we know that there is an SPD department and that is their job to reprocess instruments. But what we're going to find out during this presentation is that it is also the job of the end user to take care of those assets. And the water on the sterile field thing is an interesting one. When I first started in the operating room, we had water on our sterile field all the time. There was no situation where we didn't have water on the sterile field, but we had changed our policy and practice, and we did not want biohazardous fluids being sent to CS. So what we've started finding after that happened was, instead of taking care of the fluids on the sterile field at the end of the case and not sending them to CS, people's answer to that problem was to just not put water on the sterile field. So the problem with this, where this becomes an issue, obviously it's an issue for point of use care, but it's also an issue for fire risk. In the operating room today, we have abundant resources to start fires, and unfortunately we have to be ready for that at any time, and water should be a regular requirement on the sterile field in order to combat that issue. and that potential risk. So expectations for point of use care of instrumentation. This is a shared responsibility of the operating room and SPD, and there are components to it. There's intraoperative care and handling, there's immediate post-operative care and handling, and then there's transportation. All are important and all have industry standards, regulatory bodies, and manufacturers' instructions for use that agree on these things. So let's look at AORN. For those of you who may not be familiar with AORN, they set up evidence-based guidelines, and it's a great thing. So they survey all the evidence that's out there and they can rate it based on whether there's enough evidence to support it. These particular things have strong evidence to support them. During the procedure, the scrub person should remove gross soil by wiping surfaces with sterile sponge moistened with sterile water. And also, periodically during the procedure, the scrub person should use sterile water to irrigate the instruments with lumens. That's a really big deal, and there's strong evidence to support it. AST supports this as well. And the first scrub roll should keep the instruments free of debris and blood during the surgical procedure. This is the group that the surgical technologists refer to for their education and standards. AMI for sterile processing. They say sponge moistened with water, not saline, used to wipe gross soil from instruments. Gross soil should be removed at the point of use. So you're seeing the trend. All of these organizations are agreeing. And not only that, we have IFUs. Here's one from Zimmer that we're going to look at. Zimmer says, remove excess body fluids and tissue from instruments with a disposable non-shedding wipe. Place the instruments in a basin of distilled water or in a tray covered with damp towels. Do not allow saline, blood, body fluids, tissue, bone fragments, or other organic debris to dry on the instruments prior to cleaning. This is a challenge. Some of our cases are 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours long. If they're a revision, I've been in cases that took up the entire day. Okay, so this is a real challenge, especially for these complex orthopedic instruments. Da Vinci. Most of us are pretty familiar with Da Vinci nowadays as robotic surgeries increase. Well, they have a whole section of their cleaning and reprocessing dedicated to point of use. And in that, they say those instruments need to be wiped down. They need to be primed and wet with cold water or neutral enzymatic. This is an interesting one that I would ask that administrators and quality control managers, people who are really auditing the process, they need to actually get in the OR for this one and see if they're actually priming those flush ports on the Da Vinci instruments, because there's no way to get inside of a Da Vinci instrument and see if they're actually clean. Intraoperative care continued here with another IFU from laparoscopic. So maybe you don't use Da Vinci so much. Maybe you don't even have a robot, but maybe you have laparoscopic procedures, most likely. And here's one from Care Fusion that says point of use. Remove excess gross soil as soon as possible after use by rinsing or wiping down the device. So we want to talk about immediate post-procedure care of instruments as well. So what do we need to do post-procedure? We need to make sure the instruments are fully disassembled, the sharps are separated, and the soiled instruments are moist or sprayed with a pretreatment product. And we'll go over some other options there as well. But I do want to point out, even in this picture, you can see this instrument right here. This is actually a modular instrument. This should disconnect right here. And this instrument as well. This part right here should not be in there. That goes down into a cannula inside that instrument, and it should not be engaged at this point. And obviously, there's plenty of gross amounts of soil on those instruments. So there's a lot of room for improvement right there in that photograph. So this post-procedure care of instruments that we're going to talk about again are supported by AORN, AMI, AST, and manufacturers' IFUs. Disassembly of instruments, we just talked about it a little bit, but this is very important because orthopedic cases are just growing in volume. We're talking cutting guides for tibias and femurs. We're talking spine and trauma. They all have modular screwdrivers, and complex devices that need to be disassembled. Even laparoscopic instruments, at one time these were all like one single piece. Now we're having modular laparoscopic instruments that come in 2 to 3, maybe even 4 pieces. And items like Da Vinci disposable accessories need to be removed at the point of use. A lot of times it's hard to tell there's an accessory on that instrument. Or maybe there's a tech in SPD that doesn't recognize that accessory for what it is and that it needs to be removed. Even with the most basic instrumentation, an Alice, a Coker, any of those things, they all have box locks that are very difficult to clean, and they can be clamped shut, but we need them in the open position in order to clean them appropriately. We've had scenarios where the OR, they clamp all these instruments for their procedure so that when they hand them to the physician, they're in the right position. But if you forget or fail to open up those box locks, that can cause a serious delay in getting those instruments clean for the SPD techs. And again, you have a picture here that illustrates how easy it is to send down and forget that this instrument, which is a screwdriver that is still engaged in this uh, power handpiece chuck, this is another one where perhaps the SPD tech isn't very seasoned and they don't know that that's supposed to come out, or maybe they don't know how it comes out, or maybe it gets through the whole cleaning process before someone on the clean side discovers that it's still engaged, which means now there's probably bioburden locked inside of there somewhere. So this is very important to get the disassembly of instruments. We're going to talk a little bit about separation of sharps too. This is an OSHA standard, an OSHA regulation. So this is federal government. We're all familiar in healthcare with the bloodborne pathogen standard. This is a regulation that prescribes safeguards to protect the workers against the health hazards related to bloodborne pathogens. The reason I bring it up is because this is unfortunately a very common problem for SPD technicians. In fact, OSHA has had to fine hospitals. This particular incident was a $28,000 fine, and I don't mean the picture. The picture wasn't a fine, but the incident that's described on the right here. Disposable blades were included with reusable surgical instruments to be cleaned. That is what's represented in the picture. But there were also surgical employees that did not always disassemble, wipe down used surgical instruments prior to transporting. Now, for those of you who don't work in SPD, but maybe you work in the OR, you could probably see pretty easily how that stainless steel blade handle with a blade on it tossed into a pan of instruments that's all stainless steel and they all look alike, how that could be very dangerous for the techs. If they're reaching in and they're trying to clean those instruments, that poses a very high risk for them. So another part that we need to make sure we're doing is keeping instruments moist. So immediately after the procedure, we want to make sure we're doing something to maintain the moisture of our instruments. And again, the same common theme is that AORN, AAMI, AST, CDC, manufacturer, IFUs, they're all in alignment. So we have another polling question for you all. Which one of the following methods reflects your facility's policy procedure for keeping medical devices moist after the procedure? Do you use a moist towel? Are you placing them inside a package that prevents soils from drying? Are you using a pre-treatment spray? Maybe you're using a combination of the methods. Or maybe you don't have anything. But we'd like to know what you do at your facility. And Linda, I don't know, I'm not able to see any of the polling answers, but if you get a good
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, Kevin, I can give you the answers. 2% said placing a moist towel over soiled instruments. 2% said place inside the package that prevents soils from drying. 64% said using a pre-treatment spray, and 32% said combination of various methods, and 1% was none.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you, Linda. Appreciate that. Okay. So it's good. The vast majority of you are doing something, and that's fantastic. Linda, for some reason, I can't advance my slides all of a sudden.
Okay, can you go back? Perhaps
Oh,
it's
there we
stuck.
go. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so continuing on. So 3 ways to keep their instruments moist. This is per Amy. So remember, only 1% of you are not using anything, and the rest of you are doing something that follows under one of these 3 categories. It's the moist towel, it's the instruments inside a package that maintain humid conditions, or you're using a pre-treatment enzymatic or surfactant spray that's designed for this purpose, and that's a great thing. So here's an example of a wet towel option. Just if you do this, just remember you want to use water, not saline. For those of you who are not familiar with instrumentation, the saline will damage the instruments over the course of their lifetime and reduce their lifetime. So it is very important because we don't necessarily see that damage happen in real time. So we need to remember that it does occur and it will reduce the lifespan of those assets. Here's an example of a package designed to maintain humid conditions. This is a great example of something that you might want to use for those off-site or clinic locations, or maybe where there could possibly be some delays getting to cleaning them. It's a great solution for that. And then here's an example of the pre-treatment spray that it sounds like the vast majority of you are already using. So why do we do all this? We want to decrease the bioburden and the biofilm. Bioburden is simply the microorganisms on the product, but the biofilm is what happens when that bioburden is present on the instruments. You get an accumulated biomass of bacteria that can't easily be removed. And this can start forming within minutes, even seconds. And that formation of bioburden is particularly problematic in devices with lumens that are high in complexity, like our Da Vinci, again, laparoscopic, our orthopedic, all those, they're very intricate instruments, and biofilms are going to pose major problems for those, because once that biofilm develops, only direct friction or an oxidizing chemical can remove it. So prompt cleaning reduces or eliminates the population of biofilm forming microorganisms, which is going to be huge for your reprocessing department. We also have to talk about transportation of contaminated items. Again, we're talking regulatory here. This is an OSHA requirement. This is law. Okay, so all containers, devices, carts used for transporting contaminated items must be marked with a biohazard label or a red bag or some means to identify those contaminated contents. And it's got to be puncture resistant, leak proof, all those things. We want to make sure that the staff is safe, and the only way to do that is to have the appropriate OSHA compliant containers. So Joint Commission updates, we wanted to get to this. They had some survey enhancements that they implemented in the end of 2018. Some revisions to their on-site surveys were developed in order to promote patient safety and quality of care, but also to align all the accreditation requirements with current recommendations from all these organizations. Like we've already mentioned, you see some there on the right, but there's actually even more than that. So Joint Commission is trying to align all of those really easily for you and survey to those organizations. So IC 020201 is an infection control standard that Joint Commission is testing to, and it's also one of the most highest cited infractions for healthcare facilities today. So previously, they would cite you for visible bioburden and dried blood found on instruments. They're changing this now. So wiping, flushing of instruments, they're observing that. They're observing for that during the case or in the procedure room where it's clinically appropriate. They might even check instruments that are ready for use and are they visibly soiled. I can attest that the last survey that I went through, we had a surveyor who specifically went in at the beginning of the case. They monitored a timeout, a surgical timeout, and then they wanted to go back and they wanted to see the end of the case so that they could find out how were the staff in the OR preparing the instruments and how are they going to send them down in terms of transport. They also used to look for enzymatic solution and whether or not it was applied to maintain moisture on instruments. Now they're looking at, hey, is there a process for keeping used instruments moist? Is the facility following the manufacturer's IFUs for those products to keep instruments moist? And is the facility following their policy for keeping instruments moist? So for example, if you had a policy that stated all instruments should have bioburden removed at point of use and should be sprayed with an enzymatic detergent, the surveyor is going to expect that that same process will be followed in all locations. No blood or tissue left. Product is applied at the point of use according to IFUs, and there's no dry instruments. Now, this can be particularly challenging in today's SPD because, as you know, healthcare systems are acquiring outside clinics and outside facilities, and they're growing larger in scale. And all these places that used to do procedures that were not subject to Joint Commission or surveys like this, they have all kinds of various practices. And now the health system is responsible for going out into all these different sites and trying to figure out how they're going to get their process to meet the accreditation standard. So even in a facility where I used to work, only 11 ORs, we had over 20 extra other departments and facilities that we serviced their instruments for. So it's a very common thing and something to be on the lookout for if you're a quality person or an IP person or a sterile processing director, any of those, surgical services director. You got to watch and find out how these things are being transported to your sterile processing department from all these various locations. So if you don't have a policy, Joint Commission still is going to hold you accountable to the guidelines that are adopted by your organization or your facility or department, whether it's AORN, AMI, CDC, APIC, doesn't matter. Even if you have no policy, they're going to look to these standards and they're going to hold you to them. And just as we've already discussed, you can see that they're all in alignment. And you also have to look at the IFUs. Everybody's in alignment, so there's no getting around that this stuff needs to be done. So let's talk about endoscopes. Huge opportunity here. Pre-cleaning must be done at point of use. Pre-cleaning is spelled out really well with Olympus and endoscope manufacturers, but it should be done as soon as the procedure is completed and before the organic material has a chance to dry on the surface or in channels. And this comes right from AORN and AMI ST 91. So this is a bedside cleaning procedure. You're reducing all those soils and preventing drying, but you got to have the PPE. You have to be doing it immediately after the insertion tube is removed from the patient. You have to have your solution, whether it's water or enzymatic. You have to do your external wiping and you have to take care of the channels. So, and most importantly, you have to follow the manufacturer's instructions for use on this pre-cleaning procedure. So we have another poll question for you guys. What method does your facility use to transport soiled endoscopes after the procedure? Do you use a cinch bag? Are you using an OSHA compliant rigid container? Maybe you're using something else, or maybe you don't know. but I'd be interested to hear from you guys what kind of transport method your facility uses.
Okay, Kevin, I have got the results for you.
Excellent.
We have 21%, you say they use the endoscope cinch bag, 64% for the OSHA compliant, 9% other, and 6% don't know.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Linda. So for those of you using the cinch bag, you're going to see that there's going to be opportunity for you, I hope, as we move along here. But transporting contaminated endoscopes needs to be done as soon as possible. They need to be kept wet or damp, just like stainless steel instruments, just not submerged. And they got to be in a closed container, OSHA approved. Leak proof, large enough to contain all the contents, labeled with biohazard, and transported in a horizontal position. Again, this is from AORN and AMI ST91, if you're not familiar. And here you'll see some examples. This picture I like, if you see over here on the right, because it, to me, is a great illustration of what might be going on inside of your cinch sac. If you're a facility using a cinch sac, your scope might look like that on the inside of that bag. And to me, you're going to see a drastic difference between that and what you see over here. That container in the top is what we would call an OSHA compliant container, an IFU compliant container that's used for the purpose of transporting endoscopes. And you'll see that Olympus IFUs actually tell us, do not coil the scope in a diameter less than 12 centimeters, because endoscopes can be damaged if coiled too tightly. And for ultrasound scopes, they might even impact the image quality of those endoscopes. And if you know what those are used for, they're used as a diagnostic tool and sometimes for interventional tools. So it's very important that those ultrasound scopes are working properly. So hopefully that right there is enough to convert you guys from the cinch sac maybe to a more rigid container, OSHA compliant container. Part of the reason we want to do that is because of the damage that can occur to our endoscopes. These images are some examples of some obvious external damage that you can see with the naked eye, and unfortunately do happen. You got dents, some pinching, you got some buckling here of the insertion tube. All of this is preventable damage that could be going on based on your care and handling of the endoscope. But the problem with endoscopes is many of them also have channels. These are pictures of endoscope channels, and they all look a little bit different, but these pictures are all photographs of normal looking endoscope channels. But sometimes, even without a borescope, if you don't have the tool to take these kind of pictures, you're not seeing that there's potentially a lot of problems going on inside of that endoscope. You'll see on this picture on the far left, we have several droplets in here that are sort of white. Those are droplets of simethicone, and simethicone is not really easily removed or cleaned from an endoscope, and that's problematic. And we also have on the picture on the right, I'm sorry, just right here, we have tattoo ink. Oftentimes during an endoscopic procedure, the endoscopist is using a tattoo ink to mark a mass or whatever that might need to be removed at a later date for surgery. It's a great concept, but it can lead to a problem of staining and contamination inside of an endoscope. And then we also have fraying of the Teflon channel. And on the far right, we have buckling of the channel. This one's pretty obvious when you have the borescope, but I'm telling you, any of these problems you're not going to see unless you have the borescope. And that problem on the right with the buckling could lead to trouble cleaning that channel. It could also lead to trouble during the procedure trying to fit a biopsy forceps through there. So I encourage you to also not just work on your point of use and your transport, but work on your examination of these endoscopes and make sure they're not getting damaged. So damage prevention. Again, we want to use the proper container that allows for the proper coiling. We want to watch our process and how we transport the endoscope. We want to not place other heavy items on there. We want to partner with our repair vendors. They're great assets for us, opportunities for us. They have an external set of eyes on our process. They can identify our most costly repairs or our most common repairs, and they can help us identify preventative techniques. We also want to train all of our staff that are handling these endoscopes. It's very important. Also, we want to process these endoscopes ASAP after transport. We are now seeing in the IFUs that manufacturers are recommending a delayed processing procedure that's different if that endoscope is sitting for over an hour or whatever the specified amount of time is between the bedside cleaning and the manual cleaning. So we want to make sure that we have a process in place to document those times. One option is just to find a way to write it down manually and communicate that to staff, whether from the procedure room to the endoscopy reprocessing tech, or you can use something like this. It's an indicator, a tag indicator. You press the button and it shows you when an hour of time has elapsed. Regardless of the procedure you use, you just need to identify, do my endoscopes have a delayed processing procedure? Are we following it? Do we have a process in place? And we want to review the why point of use care and transportation is important. Remember, we talked about regulatory, we talked about IFU compliance, we've talked about industry standard compliance. And then we've also talked about surgical asset damage and loss can be very costly, and also the safety of staff and patients. So what we want to do, I said I wanted to give you some practical tips for driving quality for point of use care. And I can't tell you how happy I am to be in this webinar to be able to share this with you. But ultimately, you've got to make a decision to put in the work and do these steps at your facility to move the needle and drive quality at your facility. And another reason why I like this is because I got the idea for these tips. Really, they're not my idea. I was very fortunate as a new SPD manager to have a director that believed in educating, not just the staff, educating staff, but educating the leaders. So we meaning the surgical services leadership team, we all actually jumped in my minivan and drove to Cleveland, and we sat in a leadership seminar presented by AORN, and we listened to an OR director and an SPD manager talk about these steps and how you can drive quality through a case cart audit process for your point of use care. And that's why I liked it so much. And I was very fortunate at that time. I was new in my role and eager to make my mark and my stamp on the department, and ignorant of how else I could really do it at the time because I was an OR nurse. I didn't know everything yet there was to know about SPD. Not that I do now either, but I'm just saying I was still hungry to make my mark on the department with a very limited knowledge base. So I eagerly stepped in and did carry out these steps. We developed an audit tool for return case carts. We developed a procedure or a process to carry out those audits. For us, it was, in the beginning, it was myself. I was just collecting all the data myself. And then we presented the findings to the OR manager and OR staff and SPD staff in a report that was easy to understand. I actually developed a whole PowerPoint presentation on it with photographs and with data and that I got from my auditing. Then in that same presentation, we communicated expectations to those staff. We talked about the standards that we're talking about today and IFUs, and then we gave them the data about how their process looked, and we gave them the photographs to prove it. After that, we resumed our audit process, and we would provide feedback periodically on those results. And a lot of times we were able to give feedback in real time. We used at the time an audit forms just like this. It was just on paper. So even for those of you who don't have a lot of technology in your facility, you can take a very simple paper form audit and you can use check boxes. We asked for the OR, the surgeon, the staff initials. We were looking for whether or not instruments were clamped, whether they were disassembled, grossly soiled, whether they were sprayed, was there sharps present, all these things. But you can manipulate your own form. You can look for things that are important to you. This is all flexible. But one of the ways we did it was we engaged the OR staff. At that meeting, we asked them, all they had to do, we provided this tag for every case cart with the surgeon and the room number. All we asked of them was, hey, when you're the one sending down the case cart, please initial the tags. Okay, that way we know who was responsible for those instruments at that time. We wanted to make sure that if we did have feedback, it was going to the right person. And of course, you know, all of us think we're doing a fantastic job until we have some data to say that, hey, maybe we missed the boat somewhere. So that's where this was very, very helpful. And we also were very fortunate in that we had an OR manager that cared about this, and she actually would share results of these audits at meetings and at performance reviews, things like that. But I also want to share a customer idea. So most of us are familiar with total joints and probably perform total joints in our facility. Now we're seeing total joints move to ASCs. So even the ASCs have to get used to this. But I was recently speaking with a customer and they had a really bright idea. Bone cement is one of the biggest problems for SPDs, and seeing bone cement come up on sterile instruments is very disheartening for everybody involved. And of course, the best place to take care of bone cement is at the point of use. Nonetheless, you're still going to have incidents occur where there's bone cement left on instruments when they get to SPD. So this customer, they took a tray that was yellow and set it aside. And of all the hundreds of instruments they use during a knee procedure, they would simply set aside those few instruments that they would use during the cement process to remove the excess cement, and they would place those instruments in this separate identified container. And so now the SBD staff were aware that, hey, these instruments are going to require a little bit of attention, and we're going to be looking specifically, very specifically, for retained cement on these items. So I wanted to share that with you. But I also heard another thing today, just today, about point of use care from another customer via my good friend Steve Kovac. He was talking to a customer who has SPM instrument tracking, and he instituted a policy similar to ours in terms of the audit process, but even more enhanced. He took his instrument tracking, he put the audit into his instrument tracking system, and he made it a hard stop. That means that there is nothing that those instruments can be tracked to or scanned to in the instrument tracking system unless they have been audited. So he found a way to audit every single case cart that came down to his department, which is fantastic. He wanted the data so he could tell a story and back it up with data. And he did a fantastic job, and I was thrilled with that. So I wanted to share that with you guys, the audience, as well, because those are the kinds of things that really move the needle for the quality in your point of use care. So here's some photographs. You probably recognize these items. In this far left picture, you have a flexible endoscope. You have light cords in here. and they're all just sort of haphazardly thrown in there with items piled on top of them. You can tell they're not coiled very nice. There wasn't a whole lot of care in the handling of these items. And same with this photograph on the right. You have a rigid endoscope that's actually still in the cannula. That's not appropriate. Then you have a camera. I mean, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars worth of surgical assets just haphazardly thrown into a case cart and sent to SPD. And so if this resembles what you might be seeing at your facility, then you're probably a prime candidate to employ one of our auditing process ideas here. Now, these pictures are probably also very familiar to you. These are total hip instruments, and total hips are particularly bloody cases. And unfortunately, I'm ashamed to say that this probably is a pretty good representation of what I used to send down to SPD when I was a OR nurse scrubbing. I did eventually get a little better at this before I moved on out of the OR, but for too long, this is what my instruments probably resembled. But the good news is there are people doing it right, and there are managers and teams for surgical services that are getting it right through an audit process or whatever their process is. And those type of instruments that you're seeing right there can look like this. These instruments are so clean and so spotless that they almost look like they're on the clean prep and pack side, but they're not. I assure you they're in decontam, and there is just a little tiny blood evidence there, and maybe there, and maybe there. But there's not a whole lot to tell us that these were actually used. There, all the stuff's in their original place. There is some pre-treatment spray on that picture, on those pictures, if you can see that. So I'm not falsifying the information here. These were definitely used instruments, and people are getting it right. So I offer that as encouragement to you all that it can happen. And also I wanted to show you a couple examples of endoscopes in good containers. The picture on the left just happens to be a disposable option that you can see is allowing for the proper coiling. And again, on the right, we have a container that's reusable and is also a great solution. You just have to be mindful of how you're reprocessing those containers. But you can see, obviously, that the endoscopes are allowed to coil appropriately. So in summary, we discussed the importance and impact of point of use care. We talked about our Joint Commission scoring revisions. We talked about accreditation standards that pertain to point of use. And we tried to give you a practical way to improve your point of use care. I definitely want to just have a thank you out to my friends and colleagues who supplied the pictures and information there. You can see their names there. And also I wanted to thank you all for joining me on this webinar. I really appreciate your time. I hope that it was useful for you, and I hope that you have something now to go back to your departments and actually affect some change for the better for your patients and for your facility, of course. And I wanted to open it up now to questions. If Linda can help out moderating, we have a little bit of time left for some Q&A. And while we do that, I just want to leave up my contact info for you all. There's our website for HealthMark, and then the contact part is the portion of our website where you can send in questions or about product or anything else. We're open to any kind of questions from you all. And again, you see my name and title in my email contact information should you want to reach out for any reason. And please also, if you have done a point of use project, reach out and tell me about your success story. I'd love to hear about it. I'm kind of a nerd about this stuff, so I appreciate any cool stories that you may have, any other best practices you might want to share.
Great, thank you, Kevin. I'm getting lots of messages for you saying that thank you, and you're a really good speaker.
Oh, thank you.
Anyway, I have got a couple of questions for you. The
Okay.
first one is, who should be educated and trained on proper point of use treatment and transportation of reusable medical devices?
Oh man, such a great question. So I alluded to it in my presentation a little bit, right? Because we talked about how sterile processing now in our in our systems now, we're taking reusable medical devices from all kinds of areas now. It's not just OR, it's not just OB. We got ER, interventional cardiology, interventional radiology, you name it, they're out there. We have clinics down the street from that are doing OBGYN. So the reality is, in my opinion, you're talking everybody in the system, everybody in your system. This is a great time to utilize the assets the system's already using. At our old facility, we had a thing called HealthStream, and we'd put in mandatory education in there, and we always had to go through these modules at the end of the year, and it was a requirement for employment. This, in my opinion, should be a requirement for employment because you never know who's going to have to transport a reusable medical device, and whether they're on afternoons or midnights or got the same training as everybody else. This is the one way to ensure that.
Okay, and another question is it okay to use different methods for keeping instruments or endoscopes moist for transportation?
Oh, yes. Thank you for that question. I did want to address that anyway. So, um, the answer is yes, as long as it's those one of those three options that the AMI guidelines and AORN and all them agree on, uh, whether it's that spray, whether it's a towel that is water moistened with water, or if it's in one of those packages that maintain humid conditions. The one thing you want to make sure though is that your policy, if you have a policy, is not pigeonholing you into just one way throughout your entire system. You want to make sure your policy reflects that, hey, this is how we might do it at this particular department, but we recognize that clinics and other sites, they might be using this way of transporting and keeping instruments moist.
Okay, another question has come in. If we're still using a bag for transport, can we expect increased scrutiny?
Yeah, I think that you're going to. I think that even years ago, going back 3 to 5 years ago, I think that we had experienced at our facility a little increased scrutiny from our surveyors. I don't think um, that it's a sure thing, but I think that I would expect that, and I would expect that um, I would be working with my infection control partners and my administrators to help um, justify the purchase of better containers and better transport systems, and get your educators involved in developing your policy and procedure on it, because I think in a way you're probably going to open yourself up to a little more scrutiny with those cinch sacks. And not to mention, don't forget, you're going to probably be paying more for endoscope repairs when you're using those things.
Okay, and another question is, how long did it take for you really to make a change in your facility? 6 months, more than a year?
For us, I actually had that information available. I think for us, it took about 6 months after my presentation, right? So before, I was just collecting data, uh, and the operating room and the other customers that use the case card system, they were unaware that I was collecting this data. So there was some time up front, maybe a couple months where I was just collecting data for this presentation. And then once I presented my findings and the expectations and the standards, going out from there, it was probably a good 6 months where I was continuing the auditing process. And we saw an 85% improvement from that. It was huge. It was huge improvement. And then of course, you gotta find a way to maintain that. So if you're afraid that you're gonna have a hard time maintaining that, you might have to continue that audit process uh, in an ongoing way. You might do it intermittently. Those are things you got to figure out at your facility, or you can bring in other people to help from quality control or from infection control. These people can all help you continue your audit process, and it'll help them learn as well.
Okay, that's great. And what have you heard for clinics transporting from patient care room to soiled hold? My facility is currently researching options.
Yeah, that's a great question. You still, when you're doing from the patient care room to wherever your soiled room is, you still have to have it in a proper containment device, and it has to be properly labeled. They will look for those things. So no matter what your containment device is, it's got to be, again, OSHA compliant, right? So leak proof, puncture resistant, labeled biohazard, has a lid, and then it goes off to your soiled room.
Okay. Is it acceptable to transport soiled instruments in a container full of 2 to 3 gallons of water?
No, that's what we've been trying to get away from. The facilities are now trying to get away from sending uh, large amounts of soiled and biohazardous fluids down to their SPDs. So one of the things that we did at our facility uh, was to utilize, we had Neptunes and door knocks. Those are those large suction machines that we had in the OR, and they would suction out all those biohazardous materials prior to sending them down to SPD.
Okay, that's great. Time is nearly up, but we've got time for one more question. I have got a load of questions, Kevin, so I will forward them to you afterwards, and
Please,
Kevin
yeah.
will answer them offline to you all. But just one more last question is, I was a former surgical materials manager working with SPD and the OR on some of the same issues, tangled cords, items not taken apart, etc. What can we do to change culture since this dilemma persists even today?
Oh, that's a great question. So here's my challenge to you all. And one of the biggest uh, uh, things you need to go in, like I mentioned it when I said that we went in with data and an actual PowerPoint presentation into our OR meeting. You have to, at that point, really manage your message well. And you have to train your staff to manage that message as well, because what you don't want to do is add fuel to the fire and add conflict to this relationship. You want to frame this message in a way, another tidbit of wisdom from my former director about managing your message. You've got to tell them that this, what you're expecting, not only is it compliant and going to help you with Joint Commission and IFUs and all those things, but it's going to help us provide you better service. You're not going to get as much bioburden or bone cement or any of those instruments returning back to the OR in the products that we send you. So we are coming to you for help, um, because we want to serve you better, not because we want to shame you or get you in trouble. We just want to make sure that the people that need the education are getting education. That's why we have you sign your name to your tag that you send down. And also that we are making our patients safer. And the only way we can do that is if we work together, because these devices are way too complex now and there's way too much at stake. Patients are sicker. We need to do better as a group, and we need the OR on board, and we need all those end users on board to help out the SPD in this area. I hope that answers your question, but mostly that is in the message. Mostly you're going to do that with your attitude. You're going to manage the amount of give back from your OR partners by how you act with them. Can't be defensive, can't be punitive, can't be accusatory. All those things are very, very important. Can't stress that enough.
That's great, Kevin. Well, we've come to the end of our hour. So as I said before, attendees, I will send all of your questions that we didn't get time to ask to Kevin, and he will answer offline. So thank you so much, Kevin, for a really great and informative webinar. And obviously, thank you again to our sponsor, Healthmark Industries. Just another quick reminder that the post-webinar survey and certificate process is automated. So the survey link will be included in the follow-up email, which you'll receive in about an hour's time. Once you've completed the survey, you'll be able to download your certificate immediately. If you have any questions, please contact us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. And for more information on our upcoming OR Today webinars, please visit our website, ortoday.com. Thank you once again to everybody that's joined. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, everybody.